Hello, everybody. We're just going to let a few folks file into the room. Welcome. Thank you for being here. You're in the right place if you are coming to participate in a webinar with Romayne Levee from Mission Minded and Susannah Wolf from PS1 about succession planning. So thank you for joining us. We'll just give people a couple minutes to log in. Hope you're all having a great week. I'm seeing some names I recognize.
Yes, me too. That's lots of fun to see who's here. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Okay, we're just going to give this one more minute to reward the on-time arrivers with a prompt start. Hello, those of you just joining us. We're just giving a couple folks a couple more minutes who are logging in, and then we will get going. Thanks for joining us. And all right, I think we're at a good number. Oh, and it just keeps ticking in. All right, let's call it good. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to this webinar conversation. We're so excited to have you. This conversation is designed to be about major transitions that happen at the executive level in your nonprofit organization or in your school, or if you're here from not from a nonprofit, then it probably applies as well. We'll talk a little bit about the framing and why this conversation came about in a minute. But really our goal here is to talk about and help those of you who are either contemplating leadership changes, maybe you're in one, maybe you've just gone through one, because we know how challenging they can be and how difficult they can be to navigate, especially in nonprofit organizations and schools. And even especially when that person who is moving on is a founder or someone who has really played a transformational role in the life of the organization. So our Mission Minded will tell you in a couple of minutes a little bit more about the work that we do if you're first time attending one of our webinars. But we work with many nonprofits and schools around the country, and what we see time and time again is just, a focus on everything but who's leading the organization, because the work that you do is so important and so hard. And failing to effectively plan for executive changes is just really sets you up for a lot of complex hurdles to navigate when the time comes. So our goal in this conversation is to really just help you prepare your board or your staff and your community for a really successful transition that sets your organization and those of you who are leading it up for success. So joining me today is Susannah Wolf. Susannah, will you do the honors of introducing yourself, and then I will tell a little bit more about myself and Mission Minded.
Certainly. Thanks. So I'm Susannah Wolf, and I began my career in education teaching fifth grade more than 30 years ago. I'm currently the head at PS1 in Santa Monica, which is a K-6 progressive and pluralistic school. So I moved from the class working as a math specialist, curriculum coordinator, and then became the head of school at the Mequon School outside of Philadelphia, which is the same progressive school that I attended as a child. I came to PS1 last year, which was for the start of our 53rd year, and I was following Joel Pelsiger, who was one of the school's founders and who had been the head for 51 years. PS1 is also a progressive school, and for us, that speaks to the way that we approach the development of grounded individuals so that they can engage with curiosity in a hands-on program, one that helps them to develop the skills to confidently contribute to their communities. And the piece that's really distinctive and unique about us is that we are also a pluralistic school. And for us, pluralism is the belief that a community is enriched when individual differences are both respected. So PS1 knows that a great elementary education has to develop the skills, tools, and strong sense of self needed so that students can soar both in middle school and beyond. And every day we work to build confidence, competence, and most importantly, joy in early learners so that we can help them approach this initial educational journey with exuberant hands-on energy. With their experience fueled by these essential life skills, there's no limit to the impact that PS1 graduates can have in their communities and on our world.
What you just heard was Susannah brilliantly introducing PS1, which was some of the work that we've been doing together in a strategic planning and branding initiative. Thanks for introducing PS1 so well and pro, and I know that that's new language for you that'll start to roll off your tongue more easily in the future, but thanks for doing it in that way. And my name is Romayne Levee. I'm a partner and the director of strategy at Mission Minded. I'll tell you a little bit about Mission Minded in a second. I have been in this role and serving nonprofits and schools for about a dozen years. I'm also a founder of an independent school that's out here in Los Angeles where I live and work. And I served on the board of that school for a dozen years, and I then went on to serve on the board of a liberal arts college. And so one of the things that has been really telling and interesting and sort of relevant for this discussion today is that in my board service, I have lived through I think 6 either head or college president transitions. I've been on this both, the other side of that from a trustee standpoint, and just really understand how fraught that can be to navigate. So I was really excited to take on this topic with Susannah today. For those of you new to Mission Minded who may not have been a part of a webinar or had the opportunity to work with us or see some of our sessions in the past, welcome. We are a strategy and creative firm that helps good causes have greater impact. That is our vision and what we do every day. And in our work, we really believe that organizations like yours that make our world better need to just be unapologetically bold in this moment. There's hard work afoot that all of you are doing, and the bolder that you are in leaning into those ideas and those initiatives, the more success that you will have. So every day when we're partnering with organizations on strategic plans or on branding campaigns or capital campaign strategy, developing creative or communications for those initiatives, we are guided by a simple question, and that is helping you ask what if, what could be possible, and unlocking new ways to fire up members of your community and your supporters. And we do that because we know that when your community is united by really magnetic ideas, there is nothing that will stop them from or stop you from achieving those results. So in our partnerships with nonprofits, that is really what guides our work. We are talking about succession planning today because our vision, as I mentioned, is that nonprofits that make the world a better place have what they need to succeed. And that includes enduring the decisions and the actions that you'll take during leadership transition. So in our strategic planning work, in our branding work, in our capital campaign work, in developing admissions campaigns or recruitment campaigns for organizations, we have the unique insight in working with organizations that are living these kinds of transitions in this moment. We are in working relationship with at least 30 to 40 organizations at any given time. And easily at any given time, more than half of them are either in the throes of a leadership transition, recently completed a leadership transition, about to go into a leadership transition, or there's one afoot that they don't even know is about to happen. When we met Susannah, Susannah came to Mission Minded, I don't know, a year and a half or 2 years ago as a newly appointed head of PS1, about to start on her first year in the role, and was looking to create a strategic plan. And one of the questions she asked is it smart for me to be creating a strategic plan in my first year here? So we said we thought it would be a fantastic way to begin your career at PS1 is to engage in this work. So today we're going to talk about the importance of succession planning. If I haven't underscored that already. We think it is really critical to have that forefront in your organization. Susannah is going to talk a little bit about the leadership transition that happened at PS1 and some learnings, some things that PS1 did really well that set her up for success as somebody following a 51-year-old founding head. And then from that, some best practices of succession planning, some common pitfalls to avoid, because lo and behold, those do happen, and maybe some of those happened at PS1. Maybe some of those will be happening in your organization. We want to give you a line of sight into what those might be. And then we're going to leave time for a nice Q&A session so folks can ask questions, either of myself or Susannah. So please know if your question comes to mind, you want to jot it down. We do have an active chat. I see that there's some things in there, and Bonnie is on the mission-minded team. We'll be monitoring those. So if there's anything that needs to come to our attention, she will let us know. All right. So has anyone in the audience ever seen the show Succession? Yes, I'm seeing some nodding heads. I'm pretending I'm seeing some nodding heads. If you have seen Succession, you know that this character here, Logan Roy, was portrayed sort of as a tyrant. He continually baits and switch his kids about who's going to take over the empire, as well as some of the senior staff members that work there. And despite how awful that sounds, he actually had a pretty decent bench of people that he could pull from. Any one of his kids, although they were all horrible people and dysfunctional in their own ways, probably would be, a worthy person to take over. He also had a pretty decent senior staff on his team. So while the show was about all of the inner workings and family drama, it actually is a pretty funny example of a situation where an organization had some pretty good folks to choose from to take it over and lead it into the future. If you haven't watched the show, it's some of the most compelling TV I've seen in years. It's not for everybody, but it was a great way to just start thinking about what succession planning shouldn't be or should be. Let's just put a definition up here of succession planning to make sure we're all working with the same kind of set of words. It's the process of identifying very important positions in your organization and creating a talent pipeline. So it isn't only limited to the CEO or ED or head of school. It can be, folks that play other critical roles in senior management or senior leadership, and having an ongoing conversation about what would happen if, what's our next plan? What does this look like 5 years from now? And having that on the radar. It's an interesting data point that we discovered that there's a huge discrepancy and a missed opportunity, that 86% of leaders that were surveyed in corporations in the country think that succession planning is an urgent priority for their business, but just 86% think it's important or critical, but just 14 think that their organization is doing it well. It's a pretty big difference, and we want to make sure that that's flipped, that 80% are doing it, and maybe 86% also see it as important, or 100% see it as important. So let's talk about why it's important, why succession planning is so critical for your organization. Succession planning really ensures that you've got continuity in your organization. So it isn't necessarily going to identify your next leader if you're going to have a CEO transition or an ED transition or head of school, but it makes present for a process. It normalizes that it's going to happen. It puts it out there that maybe it's 2 years from now, maybe it's 5 years from now. And so that when it does happen, your organization isn't sort of thrust into a tailspin of, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? We never thought about this. We haven't planned for this moment. In the case of an organization where something does come along and it's unexpected, if you have been talking succession planning for a while, you can make sure that you have a system in place for maintaining your important relationships with stakeholders and donors and other folks in your community. And that, all of your work and initiatives and relationships aren't thrown into a tailspin if there's an unexpected transition. And more importantly, it really provides for that roadmap and minimizes disruption. So when it happens, whatever the cause is or whatever prompts the transition in your organization, you have already thought through what you're going to do, what steps you're going to take, what groups you're going to mobilize, what conversations you're going to have, and what processes that you're going to follow. Many nonprofits fail to recognize the importance of that as an ongoing process. And we really, really encourage you to think of it as being integrated into your strategic planning efforts, that it's something that is always on your radar. Likely you don't have a 51-year person in your organization that's going to be retiring, and that it's going to be such a transformational change. But no matter how long your leader has been in their role, it can be disruptive. So this is a just quick thing I wanted to share, because there's a lot of myths out there about succession planning. And the first is that succession planning is only necessary for large organizations and those anticipating an imminent leadership change. Not true. Succession planning is important for any organization, even an organization of 2 or 3 people. Mission Minded has maybe 15 people on staff. And we talk about it, what's the path 5, 10, 15 years from now? Who would we imagine might be running this business someday? And just to have that healthy dialogue among, senior leaders in an organization is a great way to keep the conversation alive. Another myth is that the responsibility to create and implement a successful plan is the sole responsibility of the head of the organization. So in the case of Joel at PS1, the myth would be that it was for him to figure out. He's the founder of the school. He's the current head. He should figure out how we plan for the moment that he leaves. False. Sure, he should be a part of it. He should be a conversation, but part of the conversation. But it is the responsibility of the board of directors, the board of trustees, senior leadership in the organization to keep the conversation alive and to keep it present, not just that one person. In fact, it's actually fraught with what's the right word? I don't know. Lots of ways that could go wrong if you imagine that the only person who's leading the conversation about succession planning is the one who we need to plan for. Another lie or myth is that talking about succession planning means that the current leader's departure must be imminent. Why would they be talking about this right now? Is something going on? Is he retiring? Is she leaving? Is something amiss? Not true. The more you talk about it, the less fraught it will seem. We're people, we're humans. We don't live in an organization for our entire life. We make stops along our professional journey. And the more that we talk about that and make that realistic and talk about what's the average tenure of somebody in a school head role, what's the average tenure of somebody in a nonprofit executive director role, and normalize that conversation so that when your head or executive director is coming up on year 6.5, maybe we're thinking about what might they be thinking about next. So normalizing those types of conversations and thinking about that.
And I think that's really important, especially for people who are in that leadership position. If the conversation doesn't come about in a natural and early way so that it's part of what's going on all the time, the moment when it pops up, especially if you're not the one who's initiating it, can cause some discomfort. Whereas if this is simply part of what schools do and part of the conversation all the time, you know that there's a plan and it doesn't become a personal question or conversation when it arises.
Yeah, thanks for that. That just made me think of, this data point that I keep hearing, is that there is a monumental generational shift going on in the next 5 to 10 years in senior executive positions, in nonprofits, in schools, in colleges. The number of folks that are running those organizations now that are close to retirement is a huge percentage, which means there's going to be a lot of transition in the next, 5 to 10 years. There's a lot happening now, as I mentioned, at least with our client base, but that's going to continue for the next couple of, decade at least. And that also means there's going to be a lot of first time EDs, heads of school, leaders, CEOs, because they're not just all moving from one organization to the next. There is a generational retirement happening. And so knowing that that's on the horizon just gives us more, I think, confidence to talk about, wow, that's happening. And it is likely that the next person that takes over an organization is not somebody who has probably run an organization like this before. So interesting data point. So I said 3 lies and a truth. Here's the truth. Nonprofits and schools have limited resources and time that they can dedicate to creating succession planning, let alone thinking about succession planning. So you really have to make it matter. You have to make it count. You don't have resources to have committees thinking about this all the time, but you have to keep it present. So you're not alone if you think of this as a big daunting task, but by thinking about taking some concrete steps, which I think Susannah is going to talk about in a couple minutes, maybe you can help make it more of a regular conversation, and you can build a process that's less intimidating, and eventually saves everybody time and grief, because we don't want that for you. All right, Susannah, tell us a little bit about what you learned about PS1 before you came. Tell us what you want to share about how they did the succession planning and transition well, and then anything we can learn from it from your experience.
Sure, great. So PS1 was founded in 1971, and it was intended from the beginning really to be an alternative school. It was founded by Eleanor Coben and Joel Pelsiger, and Joel stayed in his role as head of school for 51 of the years of the school that the school has been around. One of the things that I love about PS1 is something that Joel told me, I think it was our first meeting, which is that the story of the school is one of change. And I think that's true for many of us, certainly in mission-driven organizations. But I love that PS1 was intended to be a different experience, not just for students, but also to function in some ways as a different organization with a different organizational structure. And because there was long-term stability of leadership, the changes were see. Many of them were driven by Joel and his work to keep the school relevant and successful, which I believe he did. And he knew that he wasn't going to stay forever. And so as time went on, he was really the one who was driving, I believe, many of the efforts to get the school ready for what the transition would look like as it moved from the founders to new heads and leadership. While the school continued to grow, a very close alignment between the school and founder, which makes sense given that he stayed on for 51 years as the head of school. And it created a situation in many ways in which the two were largely synonymous. So the work of the institution was to think about, and they engaged in planning both internally and with a bunch of different consultants at different times along the way, to think about what would the transition look like and how would it happen that we would be able to hold on to the pieces that mattered to us as we went through this experience. So I think what worked really well for us, and things that happened at the school that really benefited this process, start with the way in which the board took on they saw their responsibilities and their engagement with the school. So we started very, very small, a bit of a mom and pop kind of institution. And the board has developed over this time to truly be an institutional strategic thought partner. And that is work that they've done probably over a significant number of years in small steps. And then as the succession process became a real reality, more actively. And that is for them stepping into a different level, a much higher level of responsibility for the overall health of the school, for the future, and thinking about the ways in which they were engaging in the ongoing maintenance of the finances of the school. And that was a lot of training and work that they did through organizations like CEIS and other organizations that support boards of independent, but also internally in thinking about their structures and the work they were doing. Within the operational side of the school, Joel and his senior administrative team worked alongside the board to really think about how to put the school in a strong financial position. And that has been really an amazing element of this process is that I came into a school that has thought carefully about how to plan for the future way and to give us not only a strong current status, but a sense of comfort and security for the future, which, given that transition years, even when well planned for, are still a change, and change can be bumpy. That's a wonderful position to be finding ourselves in. And then the last thing is that PS1, luckily, wonderfully, is a place where staff members tend to stay. Allowed us to really develop a wonderfully strong team and a lot of institutional memory. And part of the conversation that took place as the school was thinking about this major succession was to consider the timing of the retirements of several key long-term staff members, so that we were not going to find ourselves in a situation, hopefully, where everybody with this institutional memory and deep commitment to the leaving all at once, and that there would be support for each of the new roles, because of course succession isn't really just about, in my case, the head of school or the ED, CEO of an organization. It's really about leadership much more broadly, and making sure that all of those different aspects of the organization were thought about in a way that would share the leadership, help for there to be a distribution of the function of the organization, and provide additional leadership in many different ways. So there are definitely some lessons learned and some things that help us, I think, as we reflect on it, to think about both what really worked for us and some of the places that we might not have anticipated, that we would love to pass along to others so they have wisdom of our experience for their own process. One piece of that is Joel is an incredibly dynamic personality, and many of the people who came to PS1 came because of the way in which he articulated the mission of our school. That's not unusual, and it isn't just people who are the founder of their organization. It isn't just people who stay for 51 years. In many ways, people can claim their position as the leader of an institution, of an organization. They start to become, in many ways, tied to that. And part of what has been really important for us is the work that we have been doing to separate the founder's view of the school and their identity from the school and the organization. And so really thinking, and this is a lot of what we've done over the past year or so, is to really identify the organization's vision and the organization's values, so that it isn't tied to any one person, not the most dynamic among us, but to the organization itself, which allows for people to come and go while the organization holds its identity.
Suzanne, I just wanted to pipe in and say the first day I spent with your board, we went around the room and everybody was asked to answer the prompt, tell me about the school. What is the big idea of the school, or what does, pluralism mean to you? And so many people said, well, I don't really know how to say it the way Joel says it, or I just haven't been able to capture it in the way. And there's almost this transfer of responsibility too, because of that, what you just described, that he did it well. And so others, felt like they didn't need to. And that's not great. I mean, it's great that he did it so well, but it was unfortunate that board members didn't feel the same sense of relationship with the idea of your school and could articulate it.
Yeah, and I think really that ties to the second bullet on here, which is not that this hasn't been around in a longer way, but certainly over the past several years since the beginning of the pandemic, there's been an increase in the way that leaders of small mission-driven have been asked to take on more of a pastoral role within their communities and really serve as the one who expresses how things should be, and how members of the community might have a lived expression of the values that they share that drew them together. And again, this is yet another way in which it becomes so important for that to be articulated as part of who the institution is, and that the person in the role of is um, is a spokesperson for a larger organization rather than that it is their own beliefs and values that are being articulated. Another thing that is an important lesson learned for us is that life happens. And even with the best planning, there are things that are out of your control, whether that's just that something doesn't happen the way that you hoped it would, or folks come in, there's a slightly different perspective on the board or in the senior leadership team, unexpected things like illness or exciting opportunities elsewhere can create changes that are just unexpected. And that whatever the plan is, there needs to be enough flexibility in it so that the plan can still be followed and it isn't tied directly in the same way as to the head of school. It isn't tied to any one individual to make sure that it happens. It needs to be broader and have room for bumps so that when something goes wrong, there's still a way to flex and yet stay on track. And then I think for me, one of the things that has been really, really important is that there needs to be expectation setting for what is it for a person to truly be leaving and creating an opportunity for a new person to step in. And for me, that has come about through the really wonderful relationship that I've built with Joel. I know that I can go to him. I can ask questions about the history. He is equally passionate about what happens at PS1 and about the opportunities for our future success, and is able to hear me and listen to the fact that part of what will allow for the success, not just of me and my role, but of the organization that he loves so dearly, is for him to be able to step out of the limelight and step back and make space so that I can be the one who steps up.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Susannah. I had the opportunity to interview Joel as part of our engagement with you, and he definitely embodied that idea. Like, he's very, very attached emotionally, but he is very separated physically and respectful of you're the new leader. And he knows that if he walks around campus, there's going to draw a crowd, and that's going to, that's going to compromise your ability to do what you need to do. Not all the time, obviously. He can maybe show up for a special event, but he really did share with me his understanding and appreciation for that. So it's great to hear it from your perspective. I'm going to share, there's some great questions coming in the chat, and I'm going to leave lots of room for them so that we can get to them. Just a couple more things maybe to share. When we think of the essential components of robust succession planning, outlining a clear process for identifying and selecting potential successors. And that isn't just limited to the chief executive in your organization, as Susannah said, thinking more deeply about your leadership and making sure if there are future retirements happening, that they aren't happening at the same time, and that you have a pipeline and a line of sight into how those might be dealt with as well. You definitely want to have a very clear timeline in the event that a major transition is happening, detailing key milestones and actions that are going to need to be taken, including identifying consulting partners that will help you identify future leaders, setting criteria for those, and all of the ways that you'll have that process. I think Susannah talked about this. It was really a key part of the success of PS1 is training and developing not only people that work in the organization, but the board for the eventuality of the work that they will have to be doing. Consistent and frequent communication, both internally. I see a couple good questions about how do you navigate the language. We'll touch on that a little bit in a minute. But communication is absolutely critical. that you are communicating with your community when it's appropriate, when a decision has been made, when a transition is imminent. And then finally, contingency planning, because as Susannah said, life happens. Things don't always go according to plan. You can have the absolute best plan in place, and something doesn't materialize along the way. We've seen a lot of foiled searches where somebody, a new person is identified, and then for whatever reason, the deal goes sideways. And so thinking about the worst case scenario or unexpected scenarios and having plans for those is absolutely essential when you're thinking about succession planning. A couple of process musts is that you mobilize a group of people whose job it is when the time comes to activate the work and lead and shepherd and steward the work and make sure that it's done well. And that group is shepherding and steering the communications in a very transparent way. There is just such a great benefit of an entire community feeling like they were along for the ride when a new leader is being identified, that they've been invited into that process, and we're able to, to the degree that it's possible. It happens a lot in schools where head candidates come to campus and they meet families. That may happen a little less in nonprofit organizations, but really just having as many folks be a part of that process as possible is going to result in a much more successful appointment. Inviting your community into workshops and trainings to be, if they're going to be part of decision groups or groups of people who are interviewing candidates or being a part of setting up the organization to welcome the new leader. It's not like they come to work on the first day and ta-da, they're fully functioning in their role, right, Susannah? It took you a while. Like, what is this place and who are these people and what do you do here? And that takes a year to sort of learn and listen to a new organization. So really having a group of people whose job it is to onboard that person, not just the day they get there or the first month, but that there's a very, very intentional way that this person is welcomed into your community, into your organization throughout their first year. Ways to engage your community more through surveys and other forums, just the more you can invite your community members to participate in processes, the more likely they're going to be feeling really great about the outcomes. A couple of other just quick notes. As a strategic planning consulting firm, we work with, as I mentioned, a lot of organizations to help them develop their strategic plans, and having succession planning as part of a strategic initiative, a standing strategic initiative, so it doesn't stand out all of a sudden one year you've got it in and then the next couple of years later you don't, but that it's a standing item. What are we doing this year to think about succession planning for our organization? Develop a transition plan before you need it. Figure out the details. It's not if the transition is going to happen, it's when. And so have that plan ready and incorporate it as a standing item in your strategic plan. Normalize the discussion about it. Mentioned this earlier, and I see some folks are curious to talk about the exact right words to use. And that's important that you really think that through. But there's lots of ways to approach this if you are, doing it well and really normalizing succession planning as part of your business. It will really make the decisions easier for everybody. This is one piece I just love talking about because it's something that Mission Minded also offers. Is we are brand strategy experts, and thinking about your organization's brand before you go through a transition. Well, thinking about your organization's brand at any time is the absolute best thing to do. But when you are going to be going into a transition, if you can't clearly articulate your brand to yourselves, you won't be able to articulate it to candidates coming through. Candidates won't be able to understand who you are and why they might want to join you. And so what a gift to set up your organization for success in transition is to have a really clearly articulated brand and brand strategy. So strong identity, clearly articulated values, ability to differentiate how you are different than other organizations that you might compete with or in your sector, or in Susannah's case, how is PS1 stand out in, in the Los Angeles education arena. I'd love to have you comment on that particular piece for a minute, Susannah, about when you learned about PS1 as a candidate. Um, we've done brand work with you just recently. And so I guess I'm going to set you up to, or tee you up to, to say what I already know, but it was murky, right? I said to you that your trustees couldn't talk about it, but how was that for you as a candidate, coming to PS1 and maybe other schools that you might have been interviewing at the same time? Did you experience that some schools had really clear brand identities, if you were considering multiple opportunities? Just if you could talk about that a little bit as the importance of a candidate, and understanding the organization's brand.
Yeah, certainly. So I had initial conversations with the consultant who was working to support PS1 with their head of school search, and followed that up, of course, with folks at the school. In many ways, I took the information that was available to me, both through my initial conversation and things that were available on the website, and I developed my own understanding and see the school's brand. What was the most surprising to me was to arrive at school and put the question to people about why they had come, and as a follow-up, what it was that they understood about PS1, which is the point at which I learned that each of us had done that same thing. And everybody had developed in many ways their own understanding from the information that was there and available. And it was not all the same. What I'm so grateful for is the work that we've done this year with you all at Mission Minded, because it's really helped us to bring our whole community along and to give us language that we can very specifically tie to who we are. It's been tricky to come in without that and to want to move an organization forward without being able to say, well, because we believe that learning should be joyful, we do these things. And without the clear articulation of those values, there's so many different ways we could go. And in a small organization, that can create some real discord and challenge.
Thanks for that. I kind of want to skip over this because I want to get to questions. There's a couple good ones in here, but pitfalls to avoid. Don't skip over this process. Don't ignore it till it's too late. Don't fail to involve lots of people in the work. This is important, and don't fail to look within your organization and see if there's somebody who is a rising star that could potentially be filling some of these roles, and have a plan for those people in their, in their growth trajectory. Lots can go wrong. We have worked with organizations who have told us stories of rapid change or unexpected change where donor confidence is lost. Several key staff members abruptly resigned because there wasn't succession planning in place, because, folks were caught off guard and didn't feel like they saw a path forward, a successful path forward for them. We've worked with organization, the school, that experienced a lot of mistrust among parents and a significant drop in enrollment because the board, failed to communicate effectively and transparently what their plans were for transition. And we've seen organizations and nonprofits, one in particular that appointed an internal candidate, who just didn't have the experience that they needed to step up to the plate. And so maybe they were over optimistic that, they had somebody within their team. So lots of ways that this can go wrong. These are just a couple from real life experiences of organizations that we've worked with. Many more go right because they're good people doing work in really good ways. I wanted to end on this quote: a leader's lasting value is measured by succession. And when Susannah and I were building this conversation, she made her smile. She said she wanted to share it with Joel. I'm going to give you the last word, Susannah, and then we're going to cut to questions.
I do. I think that's such a quote. And of course, what all of us want in any time that we play a leadership role with an organization, founder or not, is for the organization to be successful. And there is no way ever that any of us could stay forever. And so, really thinking about how an organization outlives us and continues on beyond us, it is probably the biggest gift that we can give in all of the work that we're doing.
Thanks for that, Susannah. I've seen a couple questions in the chat, and uh, Willie had a great question. What language do you use to normalize the succession planning? By the way, I'm not sure, but I think you might be able to take yourself off mute, but if you can't, Willie, do you want to try just to experiment with that? I'm sorry that I don't know that if you can or can't, if you're still with us. I'm not hearing anything. All right. What language do you use to normalize succession planning with existing head of school or ED, whoever, to continue to make it less threatening? I have a couple thoughts on that. And as a trustee, make it part of the conversation, the hiring conversation, and start normalizing tenure, particularly in schools. I mean, when I first became a trustee at a school, the average head tenure was 7 years. I think now it's 2.5 according to NAIS data, which is shocking. A shocking difference, especially the 0.5 part, because that means some of them are abrupt, or at least a percentage of them are abrupt. But having conversations like that and asking candidates, what do how many years do you see yourself here? Let's just be honest. Is this a your swan song? Is this the end for you? Is this the meat of your career where you really, really want to dig in and make a difference? So I think questions like that, as you're meeting candidates, to the degree that it's appropriate. Obviously, there's things that border on asking things about personal life that you can't do. But I think in the professional realm, just thinking about how do you see this job as in your career story, or in what chapter of your career is this job, I think is a really nice way to just position it as an early conversation. And so you can always reference back to that when you're with your person that you've onboarded. Susannah, what would you add to that?
Well, I was just going to say it's recently been made clear to me that this is the situation really for any kind of leadership transition within your organization. And in my role as head of school, I can very clearly see the things I wish I had done before I had a senior leadership transition in our, and that allows me to come into this conversation in a somewhat different way. If we're thinking about it, not just for this one role, but we're thinking about it largely for the organization and for all of the people who play leadership roles within the organization, including on the board, that helps to normalize again some of the way in which we're talking about this work, and we're thinking about how do we simply, and actually I think in some ways it ties to Rhonda's question also, about how we make sure that there's a comprehensive process that invites equitable inclusion of the BIPOC community. And one way I think that those two can tie together is that if we're thinking about all aspects of hiring and succession being part of a process, and that there is a process with resources to draw on, whether it is organizations to identify potential candidates and having some sense of who as an institution we might want to go to and lean on for support, or having an articulated process by which we recruit and hire new individuals to the organization that specifically articulates our approach to equitable inclusion, that allows us to be ready and to have the experience of using that process different ways over time. Again, normalizes it for the community, but also makes it something that is available and accessible more broadly, so that people know this is one of our values, and this is part of how we all lean in and speak with the same language for these kinds of changes.
Yeah. I had another thought too, is when an executive director, head of school is joining your organization, to sort of name where your organization is in its life story, right? You're our second head. What does that mean? What are the things that you'll be facing and being asked to take on as the person who's, following this person? Or you're our eighth head, you're one in, and we've had many, and they've all lasted. Just sort of seeing the situation that the organization has gone through and what's been the leadership patterns, and just kind of calling it what it is. There's maybe there's some conclusions to be drawn from it, or maybe not, but just acknowledging that transition happens, and different leaders play different roles in the life of an organization. And Susannah, as PS1's second head, is going to play a very, very different role than Joel did, and probably a very different role than whoever follows you someday, 53 years from now, Susannah, because I hear people stick around PS1 that long. So
Sure, sure. I'm noticing also both Rhonda and Willie had really interesting questions about the lame duck dynamic
yeah.
and the question about having there be overlap. And I'm not sure that I can say with full clarity if this is the best practice, but I can tell you from my perspective of having come in to two organizations in this role and gone, um, that it is important in many ways that an organization have one leader, and that leader be able, for the entire period that they are the person in charge, to be that last step of the decision making. There's a wonderful opportunity for there to be a transition in which an incoming person can be connected to the organization and learning from who are there, including the executive director, head of school, while that person is concluding their time. And there can be behind the scenes lots of conversation between those two people. But for the organization itself, it's important that there be a spokesperson, and to have multiple people really kind of muddies the waters. So the person who is leaving really doesn't become every decision that they make, everything that they do, and conversation that they have through to their very last day really does guide and impact the institution. And at best, they're connected to the person who is coming in so that they have an opportunity to share history and knowledge, pass on the understanding of why they are dealing with certain issues and coming to certain conclusions, and take in the feedback from the incoming person while the outgoing person is in their role until they actually formally are not.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Susannah. I don't think I see any other questions. We have a couple more minutes if anyone else wants to pop one into the chat.
Oh,
And
there is one more, Romayne. John Mario wrote, how do you manage a transition of leadership when the founder moves to an emeritus position that is still at organization?
I'm not seeing that question. Is that higher up?
It's, for me, it's at the end of the Q&A. And there are some more also. Sorry, Rhonda has another one in there. As a baby boomer, I've been riveted to how we are, handling Joe Biden's lame duck versus elder advisor role. What I can is, again, from my own experience and perspective, it has been wonderful to have Joel as a personal advisor, and it has been essential to not have him at school and functioning as part of the organization, because he is so deeply tied into the experience of the organization for so many people that if he were to be present, auxiliary and unnecessary. And to constantly need to navigate that, the number of times he would need to say, go talk to Susannah, and not realizing that at some moment along the way, he might unintentionally be doing or saying something that would negate many of those go see Susannah's. Just sets up confusion. I think there are great opportunities to involve a retiring person in an informal way, in an advisory way. And my own personal recommendation, and Romayne, certainly you have experience with many more organizations than I do, is that it can be really tricky for a new person coming in to have their predecessor involved in a decision-making role.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that a little bit as a founding board chair as well. There were 12 founders on our board, and 10 years in, we decided it was time to go. We did the big girl pants thing and decided to figure out how to manage ourselves off the board. And we knew that doing that in a really clean way was really important. It was going to undermine future leadership. So it's hard to do for any person who's played a founding role or just any transformational or pivotal role in an organization to walk away and let the new generation lead. But it also feels good. It feels very liberating, and I felt successful as a founder to know that I set an organization up to thrive and helped identify a new board that was going to come in and carry on in different ways. But so yeah, I would say as somebody 10 years later, I was elected to an emeritus trustee position, but that was because I'd done a good job of staying away for 10 years. I think that was a reward for that. But yeah, I really, really would endorse what Susannah said, just from a slightly different perspective, but it feels really essential to have that separation. All right. Well, all right. I didn't realize that there was Q&A and chat. I was in the wrong place, or I was looking in the wrong place. So I see all of those questions, and I still say I think there are no new ones at this point. So thank you, Susannah. I just wanted to, acknowledge what an incredible treat it was get to co-host this with you today, but moreover to be your partner in the work that we did this past year together. It was such a joy. I just, don't think of this as a client consultant relationship at all. We were in there, we had our arms linked, our team and yours, and it just was really, really rewarding to be your partner. And thank you for all you taught us about how to come in and follow a 51-year founding head with such grace, and is really inspirational to see how you did that, and so respectfully and so professionally.
Well, thank you. I'm incredibly grateful to have had you all by our sides and helping us through this experience. It's going to be things that you don't think of as you're going through the process. And certainly if you haven't done it before, as PS1 really hadn't, it can be tricky. And having a thought partner is certainly an amazing resource if that's available. And if not, one who is working as a consultant, certainly to reach out to others who have had similar experiences and to benefit from what worked and what didn't for them.
All right, well, that draws our webinar to a conclusion, but thanks again. Thanks for joining us today. And this recording will be available to you. And if you colleagues registered but didn't attend, it'll be available to them as well. Thank you.